Next up, we have Major Garrett of the National Journal interviewing Senator Marco Rubio, who rarely does interviews, very few since he was elected from Florida, so we're particularly delighted to have him. Major, come on up. Thanks. Senator.
How are you?
Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, Senator, I know you have a scheduled appointment on the Hill, so let's get right to it. In your speech recently at the Reagan Library, you said entitlement programs had weakened us as a nation. That prompted someone you may have heard of, Ed Schultz at MSNBC, to call you a phony, a coward, and say that you ought to apologize not only to his parents, but all similarly aged seniors in the country for that speech. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't say that in the speech. What I said was that the role government has assumed in America today has had a dramatic impact on our country in two ways, and let me explain. First of all, the speech was a very strong defense of the proper role of government, and I actually said that government has an important role to play in taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves. I believe Americans have dual aspirations. On the one hand, we want to be prosperous, and on the other hand, we want to be compassionate. In essence, we're not willing to leave people behind, nor should we. And throughout the 20th century, as America grew in prosperity, we looked around and said, there are people out there that are hurting. There are people that are retiring into poverty. There are people that are disabled that cannot take care of themselves. And what we have in place right now is not enough. And so we created government programs to address it. And that's the proper role of government. The problem is two things. The first of all is that the creation of these programs were intended to supplement the things that we already did as a people, not replace it. And in many communities, and not necessarily the entitlement programs, but some of the other programs that government is involved in, the mindset is set in that somehow because we pay our taxes, it excuses us from our individual responsibilities as a neighbor, as a family member, as a friend, to help those who are less fortunate. The bigger problem, however, is that these programs were created without any thought towards how we were going to afford them in the future. And the startling fact, which I pointed out in the speech, is that this is the richest, most prosperous economy in the history of the world, a GDP of over $15 trillion, and yet we have a government that not even we can afford. In essence, there's never been a society in human history that can afford the level of government that we have today. And so my point was that these programs are important, and that what we need to get back to is figuring out a proper role of government that allows us to accomplish our dual purposes of both being compassionate and taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves, and at the same time also being able to afford it. In essence, create the conditions for an economy that can continue to fund those things.
Is it therefore incumbent upon you, Senator, to inform your constituents in Florida and anyone who may be paying attention to you nationally that they have to expect less as far as their benefits are concerned, and they have to live with less? They can't retire with the same expectations that they might have originally possessed.
Let me be clear. For example, my mom's 80 years old this year. She hates when I tell her age, 81 almost, and so this month. And so it's not exactly. She's in her 80s, and so what am I going to ask her to do? Go out and get another job, so that she can supplement it? Of course not. And I think there is consensus, and I think that's been real progress. That for folks who are currently on these programs or near retirement, who have built their lives on these assumptions, and in fact have paid into a system with these assumptions, no one is expecting to make changes. Here's where I think one of the great issues of our time is going to be, and that is whether my generation, people that are decades away from retirement, are willing to accept that the contribution that we're going to be asked to make for America's future, or one of the contributions we'll be asked to make, is to accept a role of government and government programs like Social Security and Medicare that exist, but look different for us than they looked like for our parents.
To be less generous, to put a fine point on it.
Well, and again,
to live with less.
Well, what they'll be is more functional. First of all, we have to understand that life has has to be a choice between real options. And here's what's not an option: that we continue to have the Medicare we have now indefinitely. There is no one in the world with a simple calculator that can determine that what we have in place today is sustainable or that it can be funded. So we know there are going to have to be changes to these programs. My argument has been that we need these programs, and that the sooner we adopt reforms to these programs, it won't be easier, but the easier it won't be easy, but the easier it will be, the more options we have available to us to deal with it. Unfortunately, it's very powerful politics. Now, maybe that has changed somewhat a little bit because people are realizing the state that these programs are in, but it's very powerful politics to accuse people of wanting to destroy Medicare, wanting to destroy Social Security. I think these programs are important for our future. They're a sign of a prosperous nation, but they have to be constructed for the future in a way that they're sustainable. Otherwise, we won't have them or anything else.
Along the lines of the Ryan budget.
Well, the Ryan budget's one idea. Right? Quite frankly, it's the most serious one out there. I was disappointed, for example, that there continues to be an aversion in Washington, D.C. to seriously discuss other options that may be on the table. I think if someone doesn't like the Ryan budget, they should propose an alternative. But I think that we are running out of time to show people how there will be a Medicare in place by the time I retire, for example. And so, you know, I would hope that that we come around to doing that here pretty quickly.
So to capsulize, Medicare has to change. You're okay with the Ryan budget, at least as a theory, to move from fee-for-service to premium support, which would be a significant change in Medicare. People need to get ready for that.
I'm open to somebody else's ideas if they're better, and I continue to talk to people about what alternatives there are.
But it's
within
the best
framework,
idea you've seen
so far.
Well,
it's the only serious one right now that's been offered by a person in a position to pass something. And at a minimum, what we shouldn't do is immediately take it as an opportunity to attack someone. If you don't like Paul Ryan's ideas, offer an alternative, but one that actually solves the problem, not one that allows you to somehow use it as a political weapon. And that's my biggest concern about the direction things are headed.
Let's talk about immigration. How comfortable are you with the contours currently of the immigration debate, particularly as it relates to in-state tuition for undocumented workers in Texas, in the presidential campaign in your party? And are you at all troubled about the reports this week out of Alabama? They're in the New York Times and other places about immigrant workers who are basically fleeing homes and communities in reaction to the Alabama immigration
Well, just
law.
on the state part, I've been consistent in saying that while I think states have a right to do these sorts of policies that may touch upon immigration, I don't think that's the best way to do it, and I've consistently said that I believe that immigration has to be addressed at the federal level in order it to be solved. Let me, and I'll get to your question about the Republican primary in specific, but let me take a step back and view the whole immigration debate from a 50,000-foot level. I believe the United States of America is the most compassionate people in the world, in the history of the world, and that includes when it comes to immigration. And in terms of, we are a nation with a strong legacy of immigration, and Americans want a system that is true to our legacy as a nation of immigrants, but we also want a system that's true to our legacy as a nation of laws. And figuring out how to accomplish those two things has been troublesome. As the years have gone on and the issues regarding immigration have gone unaddressed, it's become harder and harder to address these issues in a way that are true to our nation as a legacy.
Why?
Because our legacy as a nation of laws continues to erode with regards to this. People don't like, here's the pervasive feeling that I get from people across the country, and that is that, and it ranges from some of these feelings that perhaps we're being taken advantage of to the system we have in place is being totally ignored, it doesn't work, it's broken, and no one's seriously about making it work. So, you know, I think the existing immigration system we have has to be reformed. And now you asked about the Republican Party. Here's what I would say, and maybe it's a messaging point, but I think it's also translates to a policy point. We cannot be the anti-illegal immigration party. We have to be the pro-legal immigration party. We have to be a party that advocates for a legal immigration system that's good for Americans, good for America, and honors our tradition both as a nation of immigrants and as a nation of laws. I think it's essential for our economic future to have a workable, but again, just like Social Security and Medicare, it's a very powerful political weapon. And the temptation to use it in politics sometimes overcomes the opportunity to solve it.
In the Florida legislature, you were supportive of legislation along the lines of what Rick Perry put together in Texas. Do you think Mitt Romney is using this issue in a way that leaves you and other Hispanics in this country who may be inclined to look at the Republican Party uncomfortable?
Actually, the way that issue has evolved is a lesson for all of us. I was talking to someone yesterday. When I was elected in 2000, and I think through 2003, even 2004, the immigration issue wasn't a big issue. In fact, in 2000, very few people, especially at the state level, would talk about it. And here's what happened. As the years went on, as the years have gone on in the immigration debate, and these issues have remained unresolved, and in the minds of many gotten worse, and the number of people in this country without documents grew from 8 million to 9 million to estimates as high as 11 million, it's become harder and harder to find some of these solutions. So I think, by and large, here's what I would say. As a general rule, okay, people in the United States who are here without documents should not benefit from programs like in-state tuition. However, Here, let me give you a real-world situation.
Even though you supported that.
Well, let me give you a real-world situation that makes it difficult. Because the other, on the one hand, Americans think, yes, we are a nation of laws. And if you're here in violation of the laws, you shouldn't benefit from these programs. Here's where it gets tricky. So here's a kid who's now 18 years old, but they arrived when they were 2. Their parents brought them. They didn't come. Their parents brought them. They came in legally. But their visas expired. Their parents didn't renew them for whatever reason. These kids have grown up here their entire lives. They're 18 now. And they can't go to college. Now here's the rub. If that kid is 6'7" and can dunk a basketball or throw a 95-mile-an-hour fast pitch, we're going to find a way to keep them, right? But if the kid has a 4.0 GPA, you're going to deport him to a country they don't even speak Spanish? You're going to send them back to Nicaragua and Honduras? So people look at that and say, well, maybe we should find a way to accommodate that. And here's the problem. As the years go on and the immigration issue gets unresolved and people feel like we're not addressing this issue in a serious way, the ability to carve out narrow exceptions for folks like that has gotten harder and harder and harder. So in the state of Florida, we tried to find a way to accommodate that without rewarding law-breaking, without creating a magnet for other people to do that. And what's happened over time, if you look at the evolution of that bill in the Florida legislature, is every year that went by, the exception became narrower and narrower and narrower, to the point where perhaps now, politically, it's become nearly impossible to advocate for things like this. And I think that will remain the case, unfortunately, until the federal government and federal policymakers give people in this country assurances through both action and word that we are serious about bringing under control the illegal immigration problem and creating a legal immigration process that works.
Let me give you two statements and then I'll ask you a question. Statement one, Governor Chris Christie said yesterday, the answer about vice president is always no until it's yes. Meaning when you're asked, you say yes. Al Cardenas, who's the head of the American Conservative Union, said you would, if asked, accept a slot on the vice presidential ticket in 2012, and if you did, it would almost guarantee a victory for a Republican presidential nominee. How much do you crave running for the vice president?
I don't crave it. I wanted to be a United States Senator. I didn't run for the Senate as an opportunity to have a launching pad for some other job. You know, I think one of the things that I lament is that people somehow have come to the conclusion that United States Senator is not enough. The United States Senate is still an important, I think, very important institution where if you dedicate the time and you're serious about learning the way the process works and how to get things done, you can accomplish significant public policy. Throughout the history of American politics and American policymaking, the United States Senate has provided the genesis for some of the greatest things that this country's ever done. And if I dedicate the time to it and the seriousness to it, I have a chance to be a part of something like that. You're never going to get to that stage if you're focused on it as some sort of a launch pad for something else. And so
will you turn it down if offered?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not going to be the vice presidential nominee. I'm not going to be the vice presidential nominee. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on my job right now, and the answer is going to probably be no. The answer is going to be no. Let me not. Yeah, he's left the door open.
A few weeks ago, you were involved in a dispute with Univision, and it for a while was a dispute only between you and Univision. Now it's become a larger issue. 4, maybe 5 Republican presidential candidates have said they are not going to participate in a Univision-sponsored debate because of this tussle between you two. Is that the right decision for them? And do you have any comment on that dispute or what's now become a larger national political issue?
And I think it's unfortunate. The whole thing is something I really don't even want to comment on. I didn't want to comment on it when it happened. I think people have read the articles. They speak for themselves. They're accurate. And I know you have to ask, but I really don't even want to address the whole issue on any. I really don't want to give that thing any oxygen because it doesn't deserve it.
Is it a missed opportunity for Republicans not to participate in that sort of forum and that kind of debate?
Well, I think they'll find alternative forums to communicate with people. I don't think there'll be any shortage of televised debates, including on Saturday Night Live, if you want to.
Very last question to you. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the super committee, and do you think it should have even existed or been created in the first place?
No, I think that the United States Senate and the United States Congress is a super committee. Very few Americans ever have the privilege to do what I get to do. And I understand the reasoning behind the super committee to some extent, but I really wish we would just begin to solve some of these issues. And you don't have to solve them all in one day, but you have to. I think more than anything else, what people are looking for is what people are hoping. The answer is yes. Let me answer it this way. We have problems that are moving very fast. And one of the great questions of our time is whether our republic is still capable of moving fast enough to answer some of these questions. And the answer for me has to be yes. And ultimately, I do believe we're going to solve many of these issues. I don't think it will be easy. I do think it will take time. I think there'll be bumps along the road to get us there. But I ultimately believe, I still believe that this republic, as difficult as it may be along the way, is going to solve these issues that we face.
Senator Rubio, thank you very much.
Thank
Audience,
you.
thank you. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you.